shit. Okay, so since making the last devlog video, I went into a coma for about a month, and now I'm ready to kill God. When we left off, I had a system for procedurally generating dungeons, which I stole from a YouTube video, and then modified because it broke a bit. So now I've got a bunch of new systems, but so a bunch of that's broken. Anyway, so first and foremost, I need things spawning in these dungeons. Obviously I can't manually place things in the world like you normally would in an engine like this because, hello, infinitely generated. So, I can't predict where things are going to be. So instead what I decided to do was to stop drinking heavily before I write code. Once I had deciphered this eldritch monstrosity, I took the array that had all the tiles in, or more accurately, all the coordinates where the tiles get spawned, and then ripped a random number of those, within a set range of course, and put them into a new array called treasure. For those of you just joining us, an array is basically just a list, except you can only store one data type in it. This just makes it a bit easier for working in Unreal Engine because of the way Unreal Engine does data handling. If I was doing this in Python, I'd probably just use a list because it'd be easier. Anyway, then I stole a 4K box asset because I am not an artist and I am here to prove my programming prowess. Then I added the box thing that I just stole as an instant static mesh in the dungeon blueprint. Those are real words, I guess. For every item in this array called treasure, spawn an instance of that instance static mesh thing that I literally just talked about. Also, it takes its position and adds 200 to the X and Y so that it spawns in the middle of the tile rather than the corner, because the tiles are 400 by 400, so 200 is just half. Add half, spawn it in the middle of the tile rather than the corner, because remember, these are coordinates, not actual tiles. Good! Now that we've done that, let's spawn some enemies. This is a dungeon crawler after all, and however, they do need to be able to move. So, instant static meshes are literally by name static. So I created an actor, I gave him a model and an animation blueprint. Fun fact, this is the exact same model, the Paragon Greystone asset pack, which I used for my multiplayer demo thing, which is also on my channel. Go watch that, it's very short. I didn't explain anything in that, so if you hate my voice, it'll still be fine. Then I got him spawning the exact same way I used the boxes, except that wasn't working for some reason. Turns out I am a goblin of a human being and needed to move this function over to here, because actors don't behave in the same way as instanced static meshes do, and I don't know exactly why they behave like this, but they do. This is foreshadowing. So now we have treasure and obstacles. Well, how do you get out of the dungeon? Also, how do you get into the dungeon? Okay, so the first problem to fix here is that at the moment, you don't really spawn in the dungeon. For the first video I did on this project, I manually placed the player in the world. Now obviously that's not going to fly in a procedurally generated dungeon game, so there's a really high chance that when you generate a new dungeon, the player is just going to spawn in the void. Okay, so what we're going to do is grab the first item in the array of tiles and call it player start. Then, on event begin play in the player blueprint, we're just going to say to the dungeon, hey, can I have that? Grab the player spawn tile and throw the player to the player spawn tile, which I will remind you is an int vector, which is like a normal vector value except with whole numbers instead of decimals. So now that we've got this thing in our player, we're just going to say, go to these coordinates plus 200, so you're centered, remember? And also go up a little bit so you don't start embedded in the floor. Hot and sexy. We can now spawn in any dungeon without having to manually move the player. Whew. Okay, what next? Well, next up we're going to need an endpoint. You know, we're going to need to know how to get out. You don't want to be trapped in this dungeon forever. That's purgatory, and I have been there for years. So, we're going to do what we just did for the player, except grabbing the last item in the array of tiles instead of the first. Now this will guarantee that every time, the endpoint in the dungeon will be on the other side. Okay, so Unreal Engine doesn't build arrays in the way I thought it did, which kinda really sucks. So instead, we're going to have to get a bit clever with this. After an evening meeting with the increasingly loud voices in my head, I decided to create a for each loop that just goes over every item in the array of tiles. This is the point where I'm legally obligated to apologise to my high school maths teacher for claiming that we would never need this, because I did need this. This is remaining ambiguous. What this code does is it grabs a coordinate, in vector remember, breaks it up into its constituent x, y, and z parts, and then grabs the player spawn tile and breaks that up into those same constituent parts. Then it subtracts one from the other for both the x and the y, the z isn't really important because this is all on one level, and sets those as dx and dy for distance. That wasn't very clear, so for clarification, take the x coordinate of the floor tile that is being checked, then take the x coordinate of the player start tile and subtract one from the other. It doesn't matter which way round they are because we're about to square them. So then set that resulting number that isn't yet squared as dx. Do the same for the y values. Then we're going to take dx squared, dy squared, and add them together to get d. Now, those of you with keen eyes will notice that we did in fact just do a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's right, good old Pythagoras. Anyway, now we're going to create a new variable called max distance, which just starts out as 1. Then we're going to take d, or c squared in the formula, and check if it's bigger than our current max distance. If it is, set the new max distance as d, and set the end tile as that tile that just got checked. If that distance isn't bigger, it goes around again. It does this for every single item in the tiles array. When it is done, we should have the tile that is furthest away from the player's start. We do. I've tested this. There's no should about it. Then just spawn an instant static mesh of a rock for a placeholder sakes, and we're done. We have an endpoint. Okay, so I'm going to keep it 100 with you. This doesn't work. This is broken. I spent several days creating a few relatively bad animations in Blender. Remember, I'm not an animator or anything, I'm a programmer. I threw together a state machine and couldn't get it working because every time I changed the enumeration value, it didn't work. Groovy. It turns out that the state machine was a little bit broken because my cast kept failing. Literally both in and out. I couldn't cast in, I couldn't cast out. So in the end, I had to give up and try to throw together just a basic animation system where it just plays 1, and I couldn't have a cool, 1, 2, or 1 return to idle system. That just wasn't working for some reason. And then the basic system where it was press a button, it plays 1 animation and then plays the return to idle animation. I hadn't even worried about turning on hitboxes. That didn't work. So eventually I said, screw it, I have other priorities, and gave up. I unplugged the code, I put a comment around it that said, what am I, a programmer? And moved on with my life, Okay, so I never properly outlined what I want to make in this project, so you all know Papers, Please, right? Funny Soviet Russia game. Well, it's kind of that, crossed with Recettear and Items Shop Tale. So you run a shop and you're in debt to the mob, so then you have to go down into dungeons or crypts below your shop, get treasure and kill goblin men who don't actually move because the nav mesh machine broke, incomprehensible, have an abhorrent day, then come back up from the dungeon to a shop where you put things on on display, and that gives, and then you price gauge them and they have a percentage chance of selling. And you have to then go to a screen where you manage your outgoings because you have to pay for heat and food and medicine for your family to look after them, while also balancing your income to make sure you've got enough money to pay for the mob at the end of the time. Groovy. So the next stage of this project is start setting up the other main mechanic of this game, the goddamn family and shop section. I only have 5 weeks left, it's fine. But this stuff is much simpler. I just cobbled together some menus and created 3 instances of an actor, which is called family, and created this eldritch monstrosity, and it didn't work. Like, it just didn't work. I would enter names on the start menu and then go through the main section, and when I got to the last menu, the names were gone, and it threw an error. So basically, who here knows what global variables are? All of you? Good. So, Unreal Engine doesn't have them, at least not as I understand them, but that's because Unreal Engine's being stupid and not written by me. I should write my own game engine, that couldn't go wrong. Anyway, yes, Unreal Engine doesn't have them as I understand them in my limited programming experience. Instead, what you have to do is create something called a game instance, because actors and pawns and things like that, the player character is kind of an actor pawn type thing. Pawn, if I remember. No, maybe it's an actor, I don't remember. Maybe it's a character type, I actually can't remember off the top of my head. But basically, whenever you transition between levels, the variables in those get reloaded and set to their default states. And I am using levels to distinguish between these menus. It's not the ideal solution, but it helps me compartmentalize things in my head, which is all I need right now. Creating a game instance, these don't get reloaded. Neither does the game mode, but there's something about where that's stored in multiplayer, so it's better practice to use a game instance. So, create a game instance, and then throw all your variables at that, and then when you need them, you can just say, hey, Mr. Game Instance, give me variables. It's inconvenient, right? It's another thing to think about. But it works, so I probably shouldn't complain, or the gods will frown upon me and it will stop working. Please. Alright, anything else? Alright, you need to be able to interact with the boxes. You need to be able to interact. Okay, so I can't use an instant static mesh for the boxes, because that makes it mildly difficult to interact with them. I literally didn't try, I just gave up before even trying, so instead, I know how to spawn actors now. I didn't know how to spawn actors when I first made the boxes, so I used instant static meshes because that's how I built the walls, so I knew how to do that. So, but now we know how to spawn actors, so let's make an actor, call it treasure, give it a funny box and a hitbox, so that you can walk into it and don't just phase through it, and that's all. Then go back to your player character, write this funny code, which checks if you're interacting with something, and bam, you can now get gold out of boxes. It's only gold at the moment because I haven't yet created a treasure system or inventory system. Oh dear god, I have a lot to do, but it works. So now we're going to go on the internet and get a royalty-free ladder model because I don't like putting in effort, create an actor called ladder, or end flag, or something, then replace the big rock in the blueprint thing with instead of an instant static mesh, you guessed it, that actor called ladder that we just created. Jury-rig the code for the boxes so that if the box check fails out, it also checks if it's looking at a ladder, and boom, I'm done. At least up to this point, this is where I'm at right now. So, of course, this isn't quite done yet. You can probably expect at least one more devlog around the time I'm finishing this project and have to hand it in. But this is what I have so far. As a start menu, you can enter some names because that's important for immersion. Then you move into a dungeon where you wander around and pretend you're killing dudes as well as picking up gold. Then, when you're done, you move on to a screen that's supposed to tell you how your family is doing, but at the moment uses the same information for all of them because I haven't yet programmed that distinction in. That's kind of where it ends for now. What I'd like to work on next are buttons, so you can choose what layer of the crypt you're on, which affects how many rooms and how much treasure and how many enemies there are. Then other buttons, so you can actually progress the days. None of this stuff is hard to do, it just means rising from my alcohol-induced coma and doing work. Thanks for watching. Skyrim video in the works, probably done by November. Hope you enjoyed the video. I was trying something a little faster-paced, seeing as the first devlog I did felt like it didn't fit in with the rest of the stuff on this channel very well. Thanks for watching. Reminder that I'm cool and you should maybe support me. Alright, see you later.